everyone, and welcome back to Guitars and Music Tech. Today we're going to be talking about what's so electric about an electric guitar. Why did we call it an electric guitar? You don't plug it into the wall. You don't put any batteries in it. So what's so electric about it? We need to talk about a little bit about the principle of how does this guitar, which we call electric guitar, makes its sound. We have a pickup. Most of you might know that there's a pickup. We will discuss a little bit about how that pickup works and why does it make a sound? How does the sound come to be? Well, if you look at the pickup, you all know there's a magnet. And also you know that you put strings on it, and those strings are made of steel. Nickel, sometimes a combination of both. But you know that if you change them and you put nylon strings on an electric guitar that has pickup, you will not be getting any sound. So here lies how it's doing the sound. Inside the pickup, there's a magnet. So you have a magnetic field there. And there's a coil. A coil is basically a wire that is wound around the magnet. So when you play your electric guitar, the strings are going right and left on top of this magnetic field. It has to be cutting the magnetic field. What happens is you generate a little very faint alternating current inside that coil when the string is moving right and left, vibrating whatever frequency you're playing, which becomes the pitch or the note that you're playing. So what exactly is going on when those strings are cutting the magnetic fields is basically moving the electrons in that coil into a direction. I'll simplify it for you. You will understand it better. Imagine you have on the table some feathers, okay? And those feathers are the electrons. They're very light. They're swimming around, just sitting there. And then you take your hand and you wave at them to the left. What happens to those feathers? They will fly to the left. If the feathers were not moving, and then you move your hand to the right, those feathers will fly or move around to the right. So imagine these feathers are the electrons, which are kind of in orbit inside the atoms of the coil. And when you move your string, which is a metal, you're changing the magnetic field because the string itself is made of metal. So it's changing the magnetic field around the coil and pushing those electrons to the right and to the left, thus generating a very faint electric current. An alternating electric current, which represents exactly the pitch of what you're playing, basically what you're playing. The wood, of course, of the guitar and the construction of the guitar with the material of the neck and all the metal parts, the tuners and the machine heads and the bridge, the material of all that contributes to the sound, to the timbre of your it affects the vibration a little bit of your string, and actually it vibrates the magnet itself because it's attached to the guitar body, right? And everything is vibrating. The wood is vibrating, and thus it's moving, also vibrating the pickup itself a little bit. Plus the strings are moving, so they contribute. There's a little bit of contribution of the body and all those parts. So that's why people say, oh, this type of wood sounds better. And on an acoustic guitar, it's more pronounced. But on an electric guitar, it does contribute a little bit more to the sustain of the guitar than to the timbre of the guitar. You'll find that effects change the timbre and EQ much, much more than if you say like you change the material of the wood of your neck. The material may change a little bit, Some people, it's a little bit brighter, a little bit darker, but when you go through everything, through the amp, through the cables, through the effects and everything, it becomes very, very minor, the differences. More important is this combination of the strings themselves, the metal strings. They need to be metallic so that they can disturb the magnetic field. If you have a magnet and you try to put it on a piece of wood, it's not going to stick. If you put it on a plastic, it's not going to stick. If you put it on anything aluminum, also it's not going to stick. So that's why you don't have aluminum or nylon strings on an electric guitar. You need to have a metal so that it can disturb that magnetic field. And when it disturbs the magnetic field, that in turn pushes the electrons which are inside that coil to the right or to the left, thus producing that the sound of the electric guitar. So there's no really electric current put into the guitar from the outside world. There's no battery. You don't plug it. So why did they call it electric? I guess to separate it from the acoustic guitar. The word acoustic is the sound, natural sound, acoustic. So everybody was playing acoustic guitar. So now this one, you need to plug it into an amplifier to amplify that faint little current that's coming out of those pickups. So maybe because of the amplifier was part of the sound of the guitar itself, the electric guitar, so they call it the electric guitar. Thus, the amplifier is kind of like into why it's called electric guitar. But the electric guitar itself, there's nothing electric. It's like a microphone. Works almost exactly the same principle. You have a diaphragm, a coil, a magnet. You talk, you move the diaphragm, cuts the coil cuts the magnetic field of the magnets inside, generates a faint electric current in the microphone, and that's a dynamic microphone. The speaker is also same thing, but it's the opposite way around. You put the current inside the coil with the magnet in the middle, and then it starts to move, reproducing the sound. So you don't call it the electric dynamic microphone, and you don't call it the electric speaker, because there's nothing electric. You're not really plugging it. The amplifier, for sure, it's an electric piece of device. You need to plug it. But the mic itself, like the electric guitar, like the speakers, it's just a device which is a coil and a magnet, basically. If we want to really dig a little bit deeper to understanding how that pickups work, metal has electrons on the outer surface of it. Just imagine there's atoms in this material, the metal, and there's electrons. Those electrons are moving around, but some of them are free in the metal. That's why it's conducting electricity. Electricity is just electrons moving right and left. So to be conductive, you need to have those free electrons, like the feathers on the table. We can move them by just moving. So these electrons, they can easily move in a metal. Cannot easily move in wood or plastic. The importance of this is that each electron is kind of like the Earth going around the moon. The Earth going around the sun. The Earth is spinning around itself. Okay, and the Earth has magnetic field, north and south. Electrons very similarly. It has a small, tiny magnetic field, north and south. And it's running around the atom, which is kind of like the sun, very quickly, everywhere. So if you're able to align many of those electrons into one direction, the north and the south, the tiny, tiny little magnetic property of each electron, then you have a magnet because they empower each other. So all the north becomes north and all the south. So you can take a piece of metal, a regular piece of metal that's not a magnet, and if you rub it with a magnet, it's like you're pushing all those tiny little electrons to align north and south and aligning them inside the metal so that at the end, your piece of metal becomes a magnet. And this is why the electrons are affected a lot by magnets, by other electrons, basically in one direction. In the wood, you don't have free electrons on the outer surfaces of the atoms, and thus you cannot really align them, so they never become magnetic. You see? So the composition of the strings will, if there are more free electrons on the string itself when you're playing, which is more metal than nickel. Nickel is a little bit more weaker than the iron, the metal stainless steel compound, and then you can disturb the magnetic field more, and this will translate into stronger and more powerful, let's say louder volume, because you're moving more electrons, because you are disturbing the magnetic field more, since your string is more could be more magnetic. It's not really magnetic, but there's the electrons in there are more in the sense that they can disturb the magnetic field more. I hope you understand a little bit of that. Everything is electrons, by the way. If you look at it, study the electron. Without the electron, nothing happens. Nothing. So everything is the electron. That tiny little, people think about it as like a little ball, little particle. It's going around the atom, the nucleus. They used to say it's going, when you see those, if you pay attention to my logo of this broadcast, I put the spin of the electron. They thought it goes like this, but apparently it's not exactly like that anymore. They discovered that it's everywhere, swimming around like in a sphere, and they don't really know where it is. Kind of like it doesn't really exist until you measure where it is, and then it exists. Very weird things, but we're not going to get into too much into quantum mechanics here, but it's an interesting study. If you're interested, we might brush on it sometime, another time. Quantum mechanics and the probability of existence, and the observer. When you look at things, they are there. If you don't, they're supposed to be everywhere. Very interesting stuff. So I hope I helped you to understand a little bit the pickup and how that electric guitar makes the sound. It's contributed to the electric strings. So the electric strings, when they're thicker, that's why people like to put heavier gauges. Why do you put a heavier gauge? Because the string itself now is able to disturb more magnetic field in that pickup, thus producing a louder and a more dense timbre, and it translates into a dense tone into the guitar. But of course it makes your guitar much more difficult to bend the strings, because the gauge is too thick. I personally have very weak hands. I like my strings light. It's fine. I can deal with the sound difference, although I prefer the sound of a tiny little bit thicker gauge. I used to use 0.09 and I continue to use them. Tried 0.8. When I started, I was using 0.8, very light. ZZ Top used them. Must be good. Look at his sound. It's great. So a lot of people use 10s, 11s. Too difficult for me. I tried 10. Can't bend much. It hurts my finger. So I stuck to 9 for a very long time. If you tune down half a step, 10 can be okay. Also depends on your guitar that you're playing. And we're going to discuss this in another episode. The difference between guitar scales and the tension of the strings. I'm always looking for a lighter tension. So I'm going to tell you how to get that in another episode. So thank you very much, and goodbye.